Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome. My name is Alison Stewart and I'm your host for this episode of Cut the Crop. And today we have our resident cereal expert, Jo Drummond, and we're going to be talking about barley yellow dwarf virus. So, where are we at this time of the year with BYDV?
Right, so this time of year is a time that we're starting to think about risk. And the reason we're starting to think about risk is that our autumn sown crops that will have been sown with an insecticide seed treatment, depending on where we're at, that seed treatment may be starting to run out. So those insecticide seed treatments typically last until the start of tillering, and they tend to be neonicotinoids. So that's something we just need to factor into our thinking. So about now is about the time where those seed treatments start to run out. And we need to sort of marry that up to aphid development and the development of beneficial insects and their predators.
So very opportune time because this is literally going into the risk period.
This is the risk period.
Yeah. So talk to me about this risk period. I mean, what does it mean as far as the growers are concerned?
Right, well, there are two main risk periods, and this is the first of them, and I mentioned that this coincides with the timing of that sort of seed treatment running out. And typically what we're looking at is we're looking at controlling aphids. Now, aphids are going to be flying all through that summer period when it's nice and warm, and they're going to be reproducing, and they're going to be coming into our crops. But also associated with those aphids are going to be beneficial species, and at the moment, we see still quite high levels of parasitism. So within your crop, there's going to be goodies and baddies. So the baddies are the likes of the aphids, and they're the ones that are going to be coming into your crop and then having sort of wingless aphids and so on and so forth. And then the beneficial species, the likes of your parasitic wasps and your things like lacewings and hoverflies, they're the things that are going to be controlling that aphid population without you even having to think about what's going on.
So I guess the million-dollar question is, how do you maximise the benefit of those beneficials?
Well, there's a really great way of doing it, and it's tied in with our Lighter Touch program, and that's integrated pest management. And we've talked a lot about integrated pest management over the years, and the first thing I will say with integrated pest management is that it 100% does not mean do not apply any chemistry.
Yeah.
What it means is you really look at that ratio of your aphids to beneficial species and then make that decision based on the pressure that you've got in your crop. And there are some other factors that really sort of influence that aphid pressure, and one of them is the weather. So aphids don't like it if it's really cold, if it's really windy, if it's really wet. So have a look at your forecast for the week, and if you're a little bit concerned, because aphids like it nice and warm, they're still going to be flying around when it's maybe 10 or so degrees. They stop reproducing at a baseline temperature of about 5.8 degrees. But if you're concerned about aphid flights, have a look at your weather forecast, because if you've got a southerly coming through, that's going to do a pretty good job at behaving like an insecticide for you. Have a look at the number of aphids you have in your system, and it's not just the number of aphids that you might pick up on, say, a sticky trap or a suction trap, because that's only going to tell you what's flying. That doesn't tell you what's actually in your paddock. So it's really important to actually get out and have a look in your actual paddock itself, and we call that direct searching. And all you have to do for a direct search is have a look in your paddock, crouch down, have a look, and see if you can pick up any of the wingless aphids. And chances are, if it's still nice and warm, you might pick up wingless aphids, but you'll also pick up aphid mummies. And that's really, really good evidence that you've got a good, healthy, beneficial population in your system.
But how does a grower know that they've got enough beneficials there to do the job? I mean, out in the field, counting, a few things on a sticky trap, how do they know, yes, I'm okay, or no, I better get in here with a chemical?
So there's also an element of your own risk aversion associated with that, but the real key thing is to look at that ratio of your aphids to your beneficials. So you might go in and you might have 20 aphids and you might have 15 beneficials within a given sort of defined space. And that can give you some confidence that those beneficials are doing a pretty good job. And the reason we know they're doing a pretty good job is species like hoverflies or lacewings are actually capable of hoovering up hundreds of aphids. If you then are a little bit unsure, you can leave it a couple of days and go back and have another look. And if that balance is about the same, you'll know that that beneficial population is keeping them in check. But if things get out of sync and you get a massive influx of aphids and those beneficials don't keep up, that's when you might be thinking, I need to do something about it. And there are a number of options that you can take, and those options are going to have different effects on those beneficials depending on what you choose.
Yeah. So, I mean, FAR's been doing research in this space for quite a while. And, you know, I remember back 2010 when we developed, you know, some of that early IPM work. How much of that work is still relevant today? Is, you know, sort of all of those beneficials are still out there, the basic principles are the same? They
are the same, but I think the landscape in which we're operating is slightly different. And when I talk about the Lighter Touch program, if I'm talking to farmers, I talk about 3 R's. So we're talking about residues, we're talking about registrations, and we're talking about resistance. So at a very broad level scale, the Lighter Touch program is about reducing the amount of residues that are going into our fern shade, and that is something we're seeing a big commercial drive for. The other thing in terms of registration is we're not seeing the likes of the new chemistries coming forward. So previously we would have had a lot of options up our sleeve. And the other thing is resistance. And we know, particularly with some of these active ingredients, we're seeing repeat, almost calendar-based approaches to particularly synthetic pyrethroid use. And we don't have any resistance development in our main aphid species, but we all know from the other systems that repeatedly using the same mode of action time and time again is going to push us down a pathway that we actually don't want to go down.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know that there are proactive growers out there who, you know, are going out and they're counting their beneficials and things like that. But presumably there's also quite a lot of growers that aren't, and they haven't yet embraced the idea of sort of a more biological based system. What's FAR doing in order to encourage and show those growers how to make this work?
Well, I think the most important thing for us is that we're making sure that we're getting as much information out there about regional aphid pressure as possible. So that might mean having farmers that we have set up who send us traps, and we also do it with the support of some industry players. So I'd like to thank Advanced Ag and PGG Wrightson who help us with this in the Southland region. I'd also like to shout out to the growers in the North Island, because we're actually looking at trying to expand this network into places like the Manawatu and places like Masterton and the Wairarapa, so that we're trying to give growers some support. And the real key thing is that while we're providing some information around how the risks of aphid flights might look by looking at weather models and looking about aphid and beneficial populations within specific paddocks, it's about supporting growers to get out there and have a look. And for those of you who take the sticky trap and suction trap emails, all of those emails that you get come through with this is only a guideline, go and check your paddock. So we're trying to make it as easy as we can for growers to go out there and have a look themselves. And if any grower wants to have some support through that, we're definitely here to support them. I love getting posts. I get traps in the mail. I get photos of traps. I get photos of insects. So please send them in, and we're here to support anybody who wants to take this step, because it's really important. And we think about things on a much broader scale in terms of even the carbon footprint of what we're doing. So if we don't need to apply something, that's a positive.
Yeah, and from the work that we've done over the years, I mean, we have shown that, you know, in not every year, but in most years, there is the opportunity to sort of use the beneficials to replace what would have been a chemical application. And you know, it would be great if we could actually reduce to chemical applications.
It would be really lovely. But one of the other things that this work is helping us to do is actually looking at aphid pressure over a number of seasons, because we know that in some seasons the aphid pressure is really, really high. And 2005 was a really great example of that. So that's going to give us some confidence that maybe 1 year in 5 or 1 year in 10, we might get a really bad aphid year, and we might need to manage that system a little bit differently. But it's to give growers the confidence that if they need to or want to or find that their system doesn't require it, they don't need to apply where they don't need to. It's letting the good guys do the work.
Yeah. Now, I know that back when we did that work back in 2010, one of the things we did was we created a table showing how all the different chemicals that were being used, whether they were sort of beneficial friendly. Now, are we going to update that table? Because obviously there'll be different cohorts of chemicals available.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we're working on in the background, because since those initial bodies of work, some of the chemicals that have been registered are now no longer available or online or are able to be used. And likewise, we've had new chemicals come into the system. But we like to think of it as being a bit of a spectrum. So at one end, you've got the likes of the organophosphates and the synthetic pyrethroids, which will do a really good job at killing pretty much anything.
Yeah.
That includes your good guys. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got things that are slightly more volatile. And then you've got some products that sit within the middle. So it's about sort of balancing the risks and matching the appropriate chemistry, because really it's about making the good guys do the work for you.
Oh, absolutely. So do you think most growers can recognise the good guys out in the field, or is there still some extension work that FAR needs to do to get around and get growers more familiar with what these beneficial insects look like?
Absolutely, and it does take a little bit of practice. They are quite small. It requires a bit of a keen eye and a steady hand. The aphids themselves are quite easy to identify because they've got a really distinct parallel wing vein that ends in a sort of a spot, so you can spot them pretty well. And when you get resources that show you all these lovely pictures of what aphids and beneficial insects look like, they don't actually tell you that when you get them on a trap, it's just a splat. So it's about looking for key features, and actually there's a lot of noise on some of those traps. And actually when you're doing direct searching, it's quite a lot easier because you're actually seeing them when they're intact. Yeah. So you can actually see that an aphid mummy looks like an aphid mummy rather than a parasitic wasp that could look like a splat with legs all over the place. So there is work through that process, and during winter and spring we'll be supporting growers through that process again, and keep an eye out on crop action, and we'll be trying our best to support as many growers as we can.
So, final take-home message?
I'll let the good guys do the work so you don't have to.
Yeah, and save some money at the same time, presumably.
Absolutely.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much, Jo.
Thank you, and happy searching.
Yeah, and thank you, listeners. Have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.